Here is why you should care about the fighting that is going on in Sudan. What's happening there is more than meets the eye, and it's time for the world to discuss the actual truth of what is going on there. America and Russia are at it again, just as they did 60 years ago during the Cold War, when they fought proxy wars right here in Africa, leading to the death of thousands of innocent Africans. They are at it again in Sudan, fighting a proxy war. Let me explain. Two factions of the Sudanese military are fighting each other. One of them is led by Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan, head of the paramilitary group known as Rapid Support Forces. The other faction is led by the Sudanese Army Chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. So why are they fighting? This is where Russia and USA come into the picture. You see, in the last couple of months, Russia has finalized a deal with Sudan to establish Russia's naval base in Sudan's Red Sea coast. America is not too happy with that. Actually, they're furious. America's ambassador to Sudan, John Godfrey, expressly warned Sudan not to seal that deal with Russia, but they're going ahead and doing just that. And so when the paramilitary unit began fighting the other faction of the army, that wasn't happening in a vacuum. The big problem is that you're not going to hear this in the mainstream media. Neither are you going to hear a lot of African governments voicing this, which is very unfortunate, because Africa must learn to speak its truth and stand on this truth, because truth will set you free. So it is left to the African people, we the African people, to speak this truth and tell America and Russia to get off Africa, to get their hands off Africa. The days of the Cold War, the days of the shenanigans of the Cold War are completely over, and they cannot fight proxy wars in Africa at the expense of innocent African lives. That has to stop. The fighting in Sudan must stop. The puppet masters must stop their evil, diabolic games.
And now for the last look. Plumes of black smoke rising over the capital. Hospitals besieged by shelling. Government buildings engulfed in flames. 4 years ago, when the Sudanese people took to the streets in an inspiring mass mobilization for democracy, few would have predicted that the country would so swiftly come to this. Two rival armies ravaging the capital, Khartoum, in a brutal contest for control of the nation. On one side is General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the Sudanese army. The other, a man named Hemeti, who is the head of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. In 2021, the two united to seize control of the government from a civilian military council. Last year, under pressure from allies, they agreed to work together toward a transition to civilian rule. But tensions between the two mounted fast and have now erupted into all-out war. Sudan's struggles might seem almost unique. The country has, after all, spent most of its post-colonial history locked in bloody civil war. But as The Economist notes, the persistence of violence in Sudan is part of a global trend. Conflict is lasting longer, becoming more intractable, and taking a heavier toll on the innocent. The magazine reports that in the mid-1980s, the average long-term conflict had been going on for roughly 13 years. By 2021, that number had stretched to 20 years. Last year, roughly 100 million people around the world were forced to flee their homes, mostly because of conflict. That is twice as many as a decade ago. So what's behind these shifts? In the first place, money. As the scholar Alex de Waal noted in an interview with Al Jazeera, the struggle between Burhan and Hemeti is to hold on to what he calls their kleptocratic military business empires. De Waal notes that Burhan has appointed loyalists into positions of control in finance, oil, and minerals. Hemeti controls Darfur's vast deposits of gold, which is Sudan's single largest source of export revenue. he also has another source of power and income: his paramilitary troops, who have fought as mercenaries for the UAE and Saudi Arabia in their proxy war in Yemen. A transition to civilian rule and eventually elections could weaken his hold on either of these sources of power. This is a phenomenon we see across Africa. Resource-rich countries have witnessed sustained conflict as warlords, soldiers, and rebels have carved up the wealth of the nation. In the absence of an ideological motive for conflict, such as choosing a side in the Cold War or fighting for freedom against a colonial oppressor, greed has become the primary motivator. But this is now all happening against a new geopolitical backdrop which allows such violence to fester. Ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, as The Economist notes, a period of relative calm prevailed around much of the world, largely because the United States was an uncontested global superpower. This era was not free from war by any means, but great power conflicts of the style of the Cold War appeared to be a thing of the past. American military might, or Washington's ability to write checks, was often an effective deterrent to invasion or rebellion. But all that has changed. America has withdrawn its military and its money from large swaths of the world, concentrating its efforts on a few key areas and issues. This has meant in some places that regional powers like Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have expanded their reach, often by waging proxy wars. Indeed, foreign involvement in wars has risen dramatically, according to the data referenced in The Economist. In 1991, only 4% of civil wars involved significant foreign forces. In 2021, 48% of them did. And foreign involvement in wars is one of the factors that allows them to drag on, partly because foreign governments are inured to the conflict's immediate effects. Sudan is no stranger to foreign interference. As Ishan Tharoor notes in the Washington Post, Burhan and Hamadi's interim government was boosted by billions of dollars of aid from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Russia's mercenary Wagner Group reportedly has a close relationship with Hamadi, providing his rapid support forces with weapons and training. Neighboring Egypt backs Burhan, and Khaled Khair, a Khartoum-based analyst, wrote last month that Egypt's most consequential contribution is that it has catalyzed renewed tensions between the generals. All this bodes poorly for Sudan, whose people continue to be trapped in cycles of brutal violence. And Sudan may be just one of the places that suffers from the disorder produced by a post-American world.